Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Were students at the University of California exposed to an alien entity in 1981? Because I used to think they were alien. Anyway. Are mediums just dupes for parasites? How do you take paranormal photos?
Hello, and welcome to the 891st edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I am Ben, and we are coming to you live from WOON, AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app with TalkStream Live, and on TuneIn.com. And those assorted questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and Dad, Paul. Today, we bring you an open line show with the one and only Rick Eno sitting in for Shane Sirois.
Shane is taking some time off to work on a new book. Rick is our trusty cousin, a certified investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, and our show's Northern California reporter. He comes to us via Skype from the San Francisco area today. Rick, welcome to Behind the Paranormal once again.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's always great to be on the show. It's great to be with family on a Sunday.
Absolutely.
Yes. How many Enos does it take to get through 1 million emails?
Well, we'll have to have some of the children make an appearance. We're going to have more Enos than the law allows.
Yes.
Okay.
More like Eno mail.
Yeah, Eno land. Anyway, you can do so much with that name.
You can.
Yeah, and it has been done, I assure you.
That's enough.
Yes. Yes, I heard that starting when I was in grammar school. Anyway, back when dinosaurs walked the earth. Let's begin with some questions here from our good listener and friend Peter in Bogota, Colombia. And he sends in one question that we're going to take on our June 13th show, our 899th show. And that's going to be with Deb Rooney, who is a Northern California MUFON, and we will leave the question for her for that day. In the meantime, Ben, why don't you take number 2 there?
Sure thing. So the second question that Peter has written to us, which we are starting with first, Chris DePerino of MUFON mentioned a case regarding a triangular UFO dumping barrel-like objects into a lake. Please share full details and what has been discovered. Supposedly the MUFON dive team was going to look.
Well, this is a question specifically for Rick, and just before Rick begins, I'm sure most of us who are interested in this saw Pentagon film released from 2019 that was released video that was released last week in reference to triangular craft supposedly being seen shadowing U.S. warships. So with that lovely and romantic background, take it away, Rick.
Okay. And I'll just comment, Paul, you have a great point. If you remember, we had Andrew on the show a while ago, and he was reporting seeing a craft deploying drones over Northern California. And on that same timeline, that few days, there were several crafts seen over California deploying drones. So there may be something there.
Yeah,
something more to look into.
All right.
So, but anyways, that happened on Behind the Paranormal first.
That's right. We've had a number of firsts on this show. Nick Pope apologizing on behalf of the British government to the Rendlesham witnesses and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
That was kind of cool, 2010. All right, so we're going to take that under advisement and say more about it later, right?
Okay, yeah. So the question Peter has, I'm going to ask him for more. I did do research on it, but I'm going to ask him to write in a few more details, like if he knows what exactly lake it was, because I remember this case. MUFON does Hangar 1 video, the series. It was 14 and 15, and I believe, and then they covered a case like that. And so I'm not sure which one he was referring to. Chris DePerno is in New York in the Hudson River Valley. He's very well known, in MUFON, very respected. And the case that I came up with that I saw was in Orange County around 2017-ish. Okay, now a couple of things to think about on this. So I'm not sure of the exact location. If I can get the exact location or time frame from Peter, I can be more specific, but I'll speak generally about it. The triangle UFO phenomena, as we all know, there was from 1983 to 1986, there was about 5,000 residents in the Hudson River Valley that witnessed these triangular-shaped UFOs happening. In fact, it stopped traffic one night on I-84. So this is not an uncommon craft that we see. The one in Orange County, I've seen just the basics of it. I don't have a report from the dive team yet. I'm working on that. But there are, when I went into the database to look at triangle UFOs and put in a few keywords, thousands, probably 100 cases came up in the past 3 or 4 years. And if I go back to 2002, it'd be even more. But I do remember that case. We don't have an outcome for it yet. I am working on an answer for him. If he can send us those specifics, I can probably nail it down for him. And I can talk to Chris DePerno as well.
Okay, very good. Yes, Peter usually listens live, and I'm sure he'll get us that as soon as possible. I'll get it to you. We can deal with it in due course.
Indeed.
Why don't we take this question from Amanda here? I don't know where Amanda's from, but...
Yeah. Hey, we'll find out, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah.
Who knows? Probably not. Amanda from Question Mark writes to us. Serious question. When do people decide to start taking these photos? Is it because there's been a little bit or a lot of activity in the house? If so, do you just start casually photographing, or does it need to be under certain conditions?
Okay, I think what Amanda is asking is that is referring to what was traditionally known as psychic photography. I've always relied a lot on photography because I've had photographic training, and you can go into a lab and you used to be able to work with negatives to see if something that comes out in a photo that you didn't see necessarily with your naked eye maybe comes out on the photo because the certain kinds of film would have, and certain kinds of digital media today have the ability to see more of the light spectrum than our eyes do. Whether that's a factor, I don't know. But you'd see streaks and blobs of light, sometimes whole figures, shadowy figures, glowing figures. As a matter of fact, that kind of photography is what attracted me to my very first case. Started 50 and a half years ago in Pomfret, Connecticut, which is right in our listening area, and the so-called Lost Village there, where we had some really rip-roaring experiences. That started when I saw in the newspaper, the Hartford, Connecticut newspaper, in early 1970, an article about the man who took just that sort of photograph in that area with the streaks, and they reproduced a few, and I was fascinated. At the time, I thought perhaps the light spectrum explanation was what we did, but ever since then, for the last 50-odd years, I have always just sort of shot photos in areas where I just had the feeling that there would be something weird. That's always doesn't always work, but when it does work, that's the context. Ben, you and I in 2010 took those photos that are becoming very well known now of what appeared to be very small people in the Bridgewater Triangle area, specifically the head of the Coppicut Reservoir in the Freetown State Forest in Massachusetts. Yes. And I'm often asked about those because they're all over the internet now. And what they were, I don't know. We never say this is definitely something. This is what the circumstances were. These are the photographic details, and you decide for yourself. So we just get feelings and just start shooting photos. That's what I don't know about you.
I mean, I don't think there's any I don't think we have a criteria or a checklist of yes, it is this day at this particular time. The the air temperature is X, so let's
we
do
make
this.
note of that now. In those days, I didn't even think of that. But then there's somebody, Shane Sirois, who's usually our guest co-host today, and Rick is very graciously sitting in for him today. We have a picture that Shane Sirois took of me taking a picture of an orb. Now the orb, as it's kind of a ball of light kind of thing, it almost looks like a nucleus of a cell. That came out in the photo, but the photo I took did not have the orb in it, which is strange. Now, Rick, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I had a question first. do you shoot in digital or do you shoot in film, Paul?
Well, it depends on the era, okay? Like decades ago, I was shooting a lot of Tri-X film, which I was able to develop myself, or Kodachrome in the highly technical, high-tech Kodak Instamatic 126 camera, which was high-tech for the 1970s. And, I've gone pretty much completely digital now, although I am prepared to use film now, too, although I don't have a darkroom anymore. So it's pretty much all digital now, but I think you can get away with that if you realize that digital photographic equipment will interpret various things in a photo. So you get a lot of orbs today that you didn't necessarily get back when you were using film. It's just a matter of you have to know the context. Now, there are some in photos that I know for a fact are dust or insects or snowflakes. All right? That's something you don't have a problem with in California, but nevertheless, there are things that it will interpret. But if none of those factors were present, and you take the account that all things that Ben mentioned are present, then you can, I think, get relatively accurate photos with a digital medium.
We may have to put this on hold for a second because we do have a caller with us.
We have a caller. We have Christina with us. Christina, welcome. You're on WOON. Welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Hello.
Hello. What's cooking?
Oh,
Hi, Christina.
It's a bright and sunny day. That's what's great about it.
So you know Rick, I guess he put you up to this. So what's happening?
Paul, just let me say one thing. Christina graciously did this. I met Christina because I was investigating a sighting she had in her backyard with her family after dinner one night. We kind of covered that before. But she had this really interesting story about when she bought her property and shadow people. So, Christina, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, please, Christina, tell us about that.
Okay, so my husband and I bought this property. We bought the property because we liked the property.
Now you're in California, right?
We are in California in the Sierra foothills.
Okay.
We are about an hour from Tahoe, Lake Tahoe.
Okay.
And I noticed, when I go out in the backyard, the dog would be barking. There's all kinds of wildlife out here, but on our tree line, which I think is about 50 feet, Mike? About 50 feet to the tree line from our backyard, I would see these shadow people. And at first I thought I was seeing things, and then I realized I wasn't. And when I've done feng shui for over 20 years, so before I moved even a stick of furniture into our house, I had done the rituals that I needed to do. And when we started remodeling our property, things got even worse, and I'd start to see these shadow people inside my house. Things just went really wrong, and I did everything I could do to get it straightened out. So finally I called my master feng shui teacher, and I said, look, I've done everything I could do. She then consulted another one of her colleagues, and they came back to me, and this is what they discovered. I tried to find more information about it, but I couldn't. Where we live, there's a lot of mines, and apparently the North Star mine is behind our property. There was an explosion where 20 miners were trapped and killed, and their analysis of this is that the miners are still roaming the property. They're not free. So in their assessment, I did the rituals that they asked me to do, and since then we have found peace. But for at least the first 3 years here, that's all we saw was shadow people constantly, around our property.
Interesting. Okay, the interpretation of the event, and again, we're not there, we don't know, prompts me to say, first of all, you probably ought to count your blessings, because we had Australian listeners who wrote in and live in a very similar terrain, kind of on the verge of the outback, and they were seeing dinosaurs. stalking by their kitchen window, So I guess you're lucky in a way. But then again, shadow people, which is a term coined by our good friend Heidi Hollis, are dark figures seen very often next to your bed or something, but also around property, indoors and outdoors, that sort of thing. Now, may I ask, how tall were these, or did they vary?
They varied in size. The one in the house where my dog saw it and I saw it going from one room to the other was about 3 feet tall.
Okay.
When I'm standing on my back deck looking back to the tree line, which is about a 40-foot drop, they looked very tall, almost like a Bigfoot figure.
Yeah.
But it wasn't Bigfoot.
Okay, our interpretation of that is, now it may or may not have anything whatsoever to do with dead people. Okay, now, we long ago found out that at least in our interpretation, this has nothing to do with dead people. Now, a horrific event like that naturally is going to send out echoes across the multiverse, as it were. But the shadow people, we almost always find, not always, but almost always find are parasites. All right, who are trying to push your buttons in order to eat. Okay, it's a very different interpretation than the standard garden variety 19th century spiritualist approach that most people take. And maybe they're right, but we've never found that to be the case. So it sounds like you have done sort of the right thing, bring in positive energy to cut off the food supply, as we would put it. And you don't see them anymore?
I don't see them.
Good. Okay.
I've looked, but I don't see them.
Well, that would be our advice, and I'm going to turn this over to Ben. Just keep it positive, and then Rick. So.
Yeah, that's that.
Thank you.
I'd probably say the same thing. It's one of those things where. Sorry, I'm fumbling for words because you pretty much said everything I was going to say. So I'm trying to add something unique to the conversation.
You always add something unique.
We're trained, unfortunately, here in the modern world to constantly look at negative things. Whether it's influenced by a 24-hour media cycle or news cycle, I should say, or social media and stuff like that. It's good to do. I personally believe I hold this belief that doing like a light fast of things, media, is good. Mm-hmm. It helps you kind of stay positive and whatnot. Not that you should be uninformed, but basically what I'm trying to say is, we're conditioned to constantly look at negative things, right? 90% of our memories are negative, and we tend to think of just everything terrible rather than good memories, right? It's mm-hmm. we're trained to look at bad things. So being positive. Loving your family, creating bonds with other people, basically searching out life-giving things and bringing life to other people is good, and that's what kind of keeps these things away.
Yeah, Rick?
Well, I concur with both of you. I think that's probably what's going on. My question to Christina would be, what were these figures doing? Were they just standing there? Were they walking? Were they...
Walking.
Were they doing any activity?
Walking
just
back
walking.
And forth. Walking through,
okay.
Like you could see like a shadow walking through the woods, and sometimes they would come out just to the tree line where you could spot them, and then they would move. But they never came forward that I could see, past the tree line, except for when it was in my house.
Got it. And you're how far from Mount Shasta?
Oh, we're south of Mount Shasta, probably about 5 hours.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
It's kind of close for you Californians.
Yeah, it's just down the road.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Christina, thank you for the information, and please, keep us posted. Certainly you can do that through Rick. And we find it very interesting. And there's a little shadow person there. That's
it's weird.
Yeah, anybody who's watching on the video, that's our little cousin Aria. We call her Aria 51. And so thank you so much, Christina.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Well, we can always hope. All right. So let's move on to a question here. You have one there, Ben?
I have many questions. They're all very long.
right. Well,
shall we start with one of the things that we mentioned at the beginning of the show, or
yes, the medium.
Yes. It's funny. I'm wondering if this is a typo. So Josh from Australia writes, have you? Oh, I guess there is you in there. I thought you weren't mentioned in the question at all, Dad. I misread it. Have you, Ben or Shane, considered that mediums, quote unquote, are possibly being exploited by parasites or other intelligent, malevolent entities by way of pretending to be particular deceased persons who need help crossing over, but instead it is actually gaining access or permission needed to enter our dimension or wreak havoc? I mean, it just seems suspicious to me that a quote unquote spirit needs an alive human help. Anyway, love the show, guys.
Okay, well, thank you, Josh. That is one of the most basic questions. From day one, that has been exactly my approach. I couldn't believe, even when working with Ed and Lorraine Warren, when I first got to know them, they were doing seances. They're supposed to be so Roman Catholic, but they were doing seances and things of this kind. But, they didn't know any better. And I had a long talk with Lorraine on the very first day I was there and said, you're really not supposed to do that, and you don't know what you're actually talking to. And she said, it's funny because people very often would do that, and things would get worse. I said, well, yeah, that's
why keep doing it.
Yeah. So I like to think. I mean, they told me that they didn't do it anymore after that, and I like to think maybe I had the influence in there. But I mean, I don't know. There were questions about how they did things sometimes, but I don't know. I didn't see them ever do it again. But in any case, that was a basic question of mine. You don't know what you're dealing with. If it starts feeding your ego, in other words, oh gee, I have no friends and I don't have anything, but I have this cosmic friend, who gives me advice and enlightened masters and all this stuff. So I just don't think that that's smart at all. And I think that very often you are dealing with parasites. I think Josh is absolutely correct. Ben?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I do think it's interesting. This isn't always the case, but any mediums that we've known, and they shall remain nameless, typically have terrible personal lives.
Yeah, a lot of them have disastrous personal lives.
Yeah, it's really
with some exceptions.
Right, there are exceptions. Yeah, it's not.
That's a question I always had too.
Right, and it's like, okay, so if there's all this good positive stuff going on, then why are all these terrible things happening?
Yeah, I mean they're giving other people advice, and their own lives are a dog's breakfast.
Right. So that was always one of my things, because it's like typically it's like the goal is to create some sort of order, some sort of harmony. But yet, this just creates chaos, right? It's like
not all. I mean, there are some whose advice does seem to help, and I think there are legitimate situations. And again, this is why I hated writing my last book, because I tell people for 50 years not to do this, and it sounds as if I'm doing it myself. Communications, contacts, conversations with people from neighbors, as we call, from other realities, parallel worlds in the multiverse, which is the basis of our own theories and methods. And then nobody's dead. Nobody's giving you advice. There is information and interesting stuff going on. But I just have never considered it the same thing as what mediums try and do, talking to dead people and getting information about where the will is. Which sometimes works. I don't know. So, Rick, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I do have a friend who saw a medium back in 1996, and he told me of the what his experience was, and it was more of I guess what you'd call a reading. Yeah. And in that reading, what came across was that this person's name was Gloria. I'm going to give it that name, and she was an ordained minister, supposedly, of what faith I'm not sure. But basically, you would go to her house. You had to set up an appointment live with her at the house, and then 3 weeks later, she would see you. And my friend saw it. It was in Bloomingburg, New York, near the Catskills, outside the Hudson River Valley, oddly enough.
Yeah.
Anyways, she claimed she had Indian spirit guides, And what happened was he walked into the front parlor, they sat down, and she'd kind of look up and communicate with the Indian spirit guides and then communicate something to my friend. And she would say things like she would see two females around my friend, his grandmother and a friend who had passed, as well as when he would die, at some point he'd live into his 80s, that he'd have trouble with his legs, and so forth, and little particulars about his life. And basically, when it was all done, you just paid her what you thought she should get, and some people paid her in cookies. I think my friend paid her $30.
I'd work for cookies.
Yeah,
same actually.
I would do that. I know Aria would. But my point about it is, it was very more of a friendly interaction. It was nothing bad in his reading and so forth. But I did tell him, I said, I believe that these people have the ability to sense and feel things, but they don't know who they're talking to. And a lot of it's going to depend on who you are as a person. Are you a positive person or a negative person? And that's what's going to come out of it, because I can tell you from my cousin's research and what I've learned is that it's not your dead relationship. It's most likely a parasite looking for an opportunity.
Okay. Well, I have another point of view on that, but right now we're going to take our mid-show break here. And you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, and today with Rick Eno also. Open line show on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. And we will be right back.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to the Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Okay, and welcome back to WOON and Behind the Paranormal Radio and TV here, if you have your video going. And we are very happy to have our dear cousin and Northern California show reporter and special guest co-host, Rick Eno, with us. And we're doing an open line show today. Now, just before we leave the subject of mediums, I think we should balance this out a little bit, and Ben and I both agree on this. That
in our very short break, we both basically said the same thing.
Yes, we got a lot done during that break. That we're not saying all mediums are necessarily dumb or naive and getting taken in by parasites. We know several who are very good. And many now are starting to realize that what they're talking to is probably not a quote-unquote spirit, which is really not possible under the laws of physics in our world, so we've been told by physicists, although other worlds, different laws maybe. But they're dealing with actual people in parallel realities. I mean, if somebody who's died here, they didn't die there. And there seem to be many worlds that I myself have experienced in the past. That's in the last book that I hated writing. You've got parallel realities going on where the laws of physics are such that you can talk to the neighbors in other parallel worlds, and they don't lock you up for it or give you Prozac or Librium or something like that. So I think that we have to qualify what we've said earlier by saying that many mediums are very legitimate in the sense that they realize this is what they're doing. And probably the most telling experience that one can have is, and I've talked to people like this who have said that they went to a medium who put them in touch with their departed child, say. And I'm thinking particularly of our good friend Dave Kane. We're going to be rebroadcasting that show in 2 weeks. And his son, Nicky O'Neill, who was the youngest victim of the Station nightclub fire here in Rhode Island in 2003. And he said, and we've had many private conversations about this. And the upshot of it was, I get what you're saying, Paul, but do you have any idea what it meant to me to hear my son again? And that has to mean something. And I think from probably a world where he never died, I think the process that we just discussed holds up in that. But so the mediumistic thing is all over the map. They could be fakes. They could be parasites. They could be legit. So it's a matter of, I guess, being, as you said, Ben, is it positive or not? Any other thoughts on that, fellas?
Oh, I have a thought. It's interesting living in the modern world.
Sure is.
And
never a dull moment.
There's an ancient Chinese curse that was, "May you live in interesting times." And boy, it's interesting. There's this really odd notion that we've kind of adopted that, when somebody translates or departs, they're just kind of gone forever and that's it. And it's like, all right, cool, well that's done. Let's, keep on trucking here. Let's just keep moving on. Don't want to think about my dad. I'm going to build an airport, kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's a little John Wayne reference to anybody out there.
Really?
Yeah. His dad died and he built an airport. and
that's one way to approach it.
And that's what he did.
That's therapy.
Exactly. That's American therapy. And it's we don't take the time, and we really should. We really should take the time to kind of be silent and be still, and know that just because somebody isn't physically here anymore, it doesn't mean they're gone, right? We're with them and they're with us, and it's like you don't have any tangible evidence of it, right? At least empirical evidence, which is can that even be constituted as evidence? Who knows? That's a whole other conversation. But the main point of what I'm saying is, we're told go and be as productive as possible, which productivity is synonymous with just being busy all the time. That you kind of miss the point. And being busy doesn't necessarily equal productivity. And I think the most productive thing one can do is to just take even 10 minutes and just be silent and know that, your loved ones that have translated, departed, whatever the word is you got, they're not gone, they're still here. And it's just a good practice all around. Whether you believe in the multiverse or not, whether you believe spirits are a thing or not, it's still something that we've kind of lost in our culture. Right? It's like, you go to a cemetery and everyone's like, "Ooh, you looking for ghosts?" And it's like, "No, I'm just visiting relatives." It's like,
yeah,
it's just one of those things where we've just kind of lost it in our society. And I personally believe taking that time at least once a week to just be present with, all your loved ones is a good thing to do.
Yeah. Rick, any thoughts on that theme?
Yeah. First, excellent, Ben. I completely agree with you. And meditation is something that I've taken up in the past year, and it's changed my life. I do want to comment on, our world, and I learned this from your Paul when you were you were meditating in a hospital. I think it was in Behind the Paranormal. You were telling the story, Everything You Know Is Wrong. I think that's the book. You were meditating, and you ended up talking to someone who's waiting at a train station.
Oh, that was Dancing Past the Graveyard.
Oh, was it Dancing? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Losing track of books here. You got to keep up.
Let's get it right, Rick.
Anyway, so what I learned was that in some realities, some dimensional realities, it's just common practice to communicate that way, whereas in our dimensional, it's not. And so I have the utmost respect for mediums. I just want to say that. I think a good number of them don't necessarily understand what they're doing, but there are some that do. And my point is, in some realities, it's no big deal, and they're just talking to a medium, and that could be that lost relative that they lost or whatever, and it's just a communication back and forth. But in our we only use 10% of our brain. We don't even know what the other 90% is good for. It's probably a conscious highway, and if we can tap that, we can travel it. But we don't currently, so we don't have that outlook. And I feel that a lot of these times that people are speaking to, as you said, this long-lost relative, I see your point. It could be in that alternate universe speaking to you, that person you lost. They're still alive there, and there it's acceptable and understood. It's a way they communicate. Because as I understand it, a lot of conscious communication is through pictures. I mean, I haven't had any conscious experiences to that way. So, but it's people who report alien contact or contact with what they call spirits. A lot of times it's in pictures. And I mean, is that your experience, Paul?
Yeah, I think so too. And I was going to refer to our last open line show, number 887 from March 21st. That's in the archives and BehindTheParanormal.com. It's on iTunes and Apple Podcasts and all, wherever you want to look for it. Show 887. And that was one in which we had a question from April. Now, I wasn't sure where April was from, but we have a follow-up question from her today. But her question was, she was very upset having lost her husband. And, how do you deal with that? I just, it's difficult to feel that he's gone at the same time. He's, not physically present. It's very difficult. So we got into that at some length with Shane on that show, and it was quite. We simply came to essentially the conclusion that we ourselves operate on, that we always give to other people. It's not that they're still with you, but that you are still with them in many worlds where they never died, and it's all you. It's all one big life, and that really hits home with people. They never thought of it that way, and at least the people we deal with, most of them say, I recognize that. And April sent a lovely letter, if we have it in response to that. 'Cause
it might be floating around on your side of the table.
No.
Then maybe it's on my side of the table.
Maybe it's on your side of the table, Ben.
Who knows?
Right. So
it's a mystery.
In any case, I'm sorry, I thought we had it, but she just wrote a lovely note that it really helped her, and that she is carrying on normal life with him in this new context. Now, of course, some people think that it's not healthy, or you have to grieve, but I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. I never have.
Or just grieving in a different sense.
Life is life. The only thing that's impossible in the multiverse is death. That's why we call it translation. We don't use the word death. And the principle for physicists to approach it this way is that all probabilities are present in concrete reality somewhere or somewhen in the multiverse. Every possible outcome is actually there. We just experience it in a certain timeline, which doesn't really exist. I mean, it exists, but it's a function of our consciousness. Einstein got into that in the special theory of relativity in the 1950s. So I think there is no cause for despair in any way, shape, or form with this. I mean, sure, you grieve because a person's maybe not physically there in the same way, but you're there with them in many, many wonderful contexts, and awful ones too, maybe. And of course, I always kind of tongue-in-cheek here, kind of get a kick out of mediums and everybody or whoever who says, "Oh, your loved ones are always there." But I mean, hopefully, this is a loved one you liked, okay? Because there are a lot of quote unquote relatives and loved ones who were complete pains in the neck, and in a way you just we're not very good in your life. So hopefully you get this relationship going with the best of the best here. So that's tongue in cheek, but nevertheless. All right, so
that also doesn't mean that there couldn't be a nicer version of them in a parallel world.
Very good point. Yeah, exactly. Rick, any more wisdom before we leave this subject?
I love the topic, and it's just fascinating. And I think that one thing I've learned in life is what you just touched on was I don't really get, this is going to sound cold, I don't really get sad anymore when someone passes. I feel the loss, and that hurts, but I don't really get sad because it's almost like a graduation in a sense.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
It's a new relationship.
Yeah. I don't feel like I have a better relationship with my mother than I ever did. Now, it's been 10 years this month when she translated. But I just, the presence is there in many worlds because that's the way I live. That's my spirituality, is being aware of, and come visit me in the nuthatch when they, say I'm schizophrenic or something. But
we'll be next to you.
Right.
That's
so, but again, I think it is the healthiest approach, and I think it is as real as it gets. So. Yeah. All right, so we have one from Timothy in Yuma, Colorado here. When I was there, I learned how to pronounce it properly. I got jumped on.
I believe it was pronounced
Nevada.
Colorado.
Colorado. They pronounce it Colorado.
It's pretty rad.
So anyway, here's It's at the bottom of the page there.
Sure.
It'll need some background explanation.
Sure thing. So Timothy writes, I see we have had similar injuries with my NDE being a missing identical twin from early infancy. You also have physical verification as to your reality, something I view as very rare. As a quote-unquote memory of my encounter is somewhat nil, I would like to hear about your NDE. I attended a couple of IAND meetings, but I'm retired and fairly free, but do have fatigue issues, though it's a lot better. Okay.
Well, thank you, Timothy. We went back and forth a little bit on this. I wasn't quite sure what he was getting at in my NDE. I've had a lot of experiences that I would consider parallel world experiences, but I initially told him I've never had a near NDE being a near-death experience that I could remember. And then, bang, it hit me.
I was going to say,
I have.
Yeah, the lizard.
The lizard, yeah.
I could have told you that.
Well, I don't know how you remember it. You were like 3.
Well, because you've talked about it before, and I remember things.
You do, yes.
I remember many things.
Yes,
it's
you
a
do.
dad story. I get it, Ben.
Yeah. So,
and then it ended with some punchline and some pun. I don't know.
Well, anyway, I was in my I don't know. Ben was a young lad. I was in my 40s. I remember we were at the old place in Cumberland, Rhode Island. We had a lovely place in the woods that we had.
And we both had pneumonia.
We both had, well, you didn't know it yet. I didn't know it either.
I was 3. I had no.
my heart was going pitter-pat, and I drove myself to the hospital, and it turns out that I had pneumonia and atrial fibrillation going on.
Oh, brutal.
Oh, God.
So they admitted me. I was there for 10 days.
What?
And but before I went to the hospital, you were always very, you were always a good child. You didn't tear the house apart, at least not much.
You paused a little too long before saying.
Right. Well, anyway, it's statute of limitations.
I guess that's fair, yeah.
So I'm standing there, and all of a sudden, my consciousness shifted to a presumably parallel world where, because I was starting to feel kind of pretty woozy, and the colors were like nothing I'd ever seen before. And it was, you'd expect some, beautiful landscape or unicorns leaping over rainbows or something. But no, it was a multicolored lizard standing in the mouth of a kind of a cave that had been built by humans. And a lizard. But it was the most peaceful, wonderful feeling in world. And to this day, I don't get it. I mean, most people aren't all that lizard happy or crazy about lizards, but it was a beautiful experience. So I suppose, given my state of health, I was in critical condition in the hospital after that, and here I drove myself, and maybe that was a near-death experience. I suppose. I didn't see myself floating over the chicken coop that day or anything, but it was. So I suppose. So I kind of consider that a near-death experience. It wasn't as dramatic as some people's. It was just odd because I guess you have to know me. Maybe that's the reason. But the injuries that he may have referred to was something I talk about in my book Turning Home. I was in the military on a winter survival exercise in the Yukon, of all places, in January. Something that I've really, winter's never bothered me ever since. It's no wonder, but I was caught in a small avalanche, and I had a good 6 or 8 feet of snow, on top of me, and it was pretty much powder. But I couldn't breathe. And my chest was constricted, and my fellow soldiers, if you will, were trying to get me out, and all of a sudden up I popped, and I remember. My right hand started to feel something pulled me up out of that thing right to the top of this 8 feet, and they couldn't believe it. And something saved my life. So, but I wasn't injured, not a scratch. So maybe that's something that Timothy was thinking of when he was referring to that. But I think the altered states of consciousness, the changes, the time shifts, and things are sort of a normal part of our lives if we will accept it. It's just a part of our super lives, a term we had to invent to talk about our life across the multiverse.
And Paul, as your cousin who loves you dearly, you have lived the life of Indiana Jones. I mean, it's amazing what you've done.
Yeah, well, I've gotten around. I've been busy. Yeah.
He also has the hat, so at least you got that.
I do have the hat. It needs to be dusted, but yeah. I used to wear it to your touch football games when you were in grammar school.
That is true.
All the other parents would kind of look at me.
Ah, yes.
Who is this?
What is Harrison Ford doing here?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Anyway, I could do without the cobras, but anyway.
So why's it got to be snakes?
Yeah, right. So what do we have next there, Ben?
We have some very long emails, but let's go with Salvatore in New Jersey, who asks about geographical places. And he writes, do geographical places exist which manifest paranormal phenomena because of energy fields, space-time portals, or because of extraterrestrial beings, or interdimensional entities, or spiritually benevolent spaces, or spiritually malevolent infestations? Each category seems to involve various space-time distortions or manipulation, or perhaps might only involve cognitive or conscious inventions. And there's a whole bunch of other questions after that, so we can probably take it a little bit at a time, probably do some now, do some later, I guess.
All right.
Does that sound good?
It's all yours, yep.
Oh, this is actually kind of cool. I've been doing some sort of research on this. Only because by research I mean I listen to a lot of podcasts and documentaries about it, because I work a full-time job. So it's interesting that this is brought up, and I would say yes, for a couple of different reasons. It could be geological. That's something we've kind of found with the Bouguer anomaly, and for those who've listened to the show faithfully for years, you would know what it is. For those who do not, essentially what it is it's a geological phenomena where you'd think the closer you get to Earth, the heavier you'd get, like the center of the Earth. So, but in this case, it would be the opposite. Most geologists aren't entirely sure why it happens, but there's speculation that it has to do with fossil fuels. You can look up a map of the Bouguer anomaly if you ever get a chance to. There's some very great resources out there that talk about it, and there's a really fascinating map that shows basically like densities of where it is. And typically, if you look at where they are, it's usually where there's a lot of paranormal phenomena, flaps, whatever. So, you'll find some around. One that comes to mind, I believe, is Yellowstone National Forest is one of them. National Park, where, if anybody who knows, the 411 reports, that's where a lot of missing persons tend to disappear, and any sort of things like that. So I would say that that's also true. I would also say that there's a really, really interesting thing that if you watch the History Channel, or if you happen to know anything about ancient cosmology, there's a really fascinating sort of view of where holy places are. Typically it's like I learned this really interesting thing about the Tower of Babel. I'll make this very quick because we don't have a ton of time. That apparently Babel comes from the Sumerian word Babile, which essentially means the gate of the gods. And so it's basically the biblical story is people try to build this tower, and they say, hey, we're going to go up and we're going to get God or whatever. And so they build this big tower. If you look at it in art, it looks kind of like the Leaning Tower of Pisa sometimes. Sometimes it just looks like this haphazard structure. But actually, it was probably structured more like a mountain, because gods were said to have lived on mountains. Typically on mountains where gardens would exist, right? So, if you ever watch any old movies about the gods of Olympus, typically they're on top of a mountain. There's a fountain and a garden. There's Mount Hermon. If anyone's familiar with that, I believe that is in Syria.
Actually, it's
that's not Syria. I forget where it is.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank here. It's in the Middle East, obviously.
Yes,
in the biblical lands. Yeah.
Yes, and I believe it's either Mount Hermon or one of the other ancient mountains where there's something like
Sinai Peninsula, I think.
Yeah, and there's tons of little pagan altars to a bunch of different gods on that mountain. And it's, it's really interesting that, they would go to mountains. Why? Maybe it's geological phenomena, maybe it's aliens. But one of I think it tends to center personally around geological phenomena where these thin places kind of exist, which I believe comes from Irish folklore, and then kind of filtered its way into a bunch of other things. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think now, Rick, any thoughts on this? I think we're going to have to take this over to the next open line show because it's a very large topic and important. Go ahead, Rick.
Just quickly, I agree with Ben. There is, if there's a high content of granite, a high water table, negative EMFs, you can see a lot of phenomenon happen there. There's the mystery spot in California, and Santa Cruz is one where there's some bizarre anomalies, and also Mount Shasta, and they both consist of those negative EMFs, a lot of granite, quartz too, and high water table. You see that. Okay.
Just very quickly before we go to our announcements, we received this last week, and I was really impressed with it. And I don't know, I never know what camera I'm on.
Hold,
here.
Please, while I get the proper camera.
All right. Well, all right. That's the Paranormal Press magazine. It's brand new. You can get the initial edition here. It's a collectible, I think. And open up to that where it's marked there, Ben, if you would. And I wrote the section on. To introduce the other page with me on it. All right. It's rather a scary but accurate representation of my visage, and I wrote the overview to the Mothman section. But check it out. It's the paranormalpress.com, and that's I think it's really, really kind of cool. And this is the first of many issues, hopefully. And I have no particular interest in it except that I write for it. But I think it was pretty cool. So let's get on.
It's always nice to see a rotoscoped version of you, Father.
Well, I don't know. Hopefully, I don't know. We'll see. So let's get on to the announcements here, Ben, if we would.
Oh, indeed. And boy, do we have announcements aplenty. So our 5th neighborhood meeting in what we refer to as the Pennsylvania Triangle, or the Du Bois Triangle, will take place via Zoom on Saturday, May 8th at 3 p.m. There will be brief presentations by us and by our colleagues who are in the group investigating this case since 2016. Also, there will be guest appearances by 2 local cryptid experts. It's free, but there will be a chance to donate to a specific charity. We would like to limit the participation to people who live in the Clearfield County, or at least in Pennsylvania. But if you have a special interest or feel you have something to contribute to the discussion of this Flap area case, please contact my dad at paul@behindtheparanormal.com.
Okay, our new book is still in progress, Behind the Paranormal 3, Uneasy Skies. Also contributing will be several of our colleagues. As I say, Rick may not know it yet, but we're going to ask him to kick in some information there.
Surprise!
Yes. The book will also contain the best of our interviews over the years with the greatest researchers in the field. And there we have it. Rick, what's going on with you?
Well, I've got 3 cases right now that are balancing me out. That mostly involve orbs. I'll share those later on as get them closer, because when they're not closed, I can't really talk about them. But that seems to be a popular phenomenon in California right now. And other than that, be honest, I'm waiting for the school year to end and summer to start.
Okay. Are your kids back in school?
They are still virtual. Yeah.
Really?
We're still kind of locked down here. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, gee. All right. Well, dear old California. Got to love the place.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll hold my tongue.
And just point out that we've reloaded most of the recorded shows back to 2009. We still have a year or more to go. They're gradually being uploaded to the archives at behindtheparanormal.com. And most of them are also on YouTube, iTunes, and all those good podcast sites as well. So.
Indeed, and if you happen to listen to us on iTunes, you can give us a little rating and leave us a little comment, and it helps us grow the show.
Okay, and what do we got for next week, Ben?
Ooh, we have some stuff. So next week, that's April 25th, we'll welcome back Jim Bauk and, for the first time, Bob Long, co-authors of a new book on how whatever does alien abductions controls those abductions.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever received any sort of concrete explanation on a mechanism.
Well, that, and we have another show coming up in a couple of weeks with Lisa O'Hara, I should say, about how to fight back With whatever this is.
Interesting.
So anyway, we'll leave you today with a pithy thought from the 6th century BC Chinese philosopher Kung Fuzi, otherwise known as Confucius. Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance, unquote.
Huh.
I'm Paul Eno.
I'm Ben Eno, and fun fact, he was actually he was around the time Socrates was, so they had a similar thought.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, rounding out the Enos, I'm Rick Eno. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.